want to share tonight is personally very difficult. And the reason it is that this issue and this presentation will be the most difficult one I've done in 26 years. I'm accustomed to giving folks bad news. So this is very, very bad news. And I'm not saying that to be at all melodramatic. I'm telling you what the truth is. And the only reason I'm doing this is that there have been information coming in, pinging my system, indicating that we're getting closer to the hoaxing of events to stampede the world into something that would make them look like a picnic. And there are a number of signs that have been mounting on this issue over the last 6 to 9 months. And I'm gravely concerned about it. My philosophy has always been an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Because if we can do what we should tonight and get the word out about this, there's a chance we can avoid what I'm going to be discussing. So it's a bit like if you were to tell someone they have some signs for a massive heart attack and it's imminent and you can do some things right now, prevent it. You can ignore it and have it and have a code blue where the heart stops and you have to be resuscitated. My goal here, using that medical analogy a little further, is to avoid the attack. And in this case, it would not be a medical emergency. It would be a national security and global emergency orchestrated by people who have been planning this since the 1950s. So what I'm going to be discussing is what in the parlance of the Pentagon, CIA, counterintelligence programs is known as a false INW, or a deceptive INW, or indication and warning. And some years ago, I had a meeting with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and General Patrick Hughes, and the focus of that briefing, which was quite extensive, was to give him information so that he would not be deceived in the event of a false or deceptive INW, indication and warning. And so you have people who often, you would think, who would have knowledge of these issues, and it turns out they do not. And then there are other people who should have nothing to do with something this sensitive, who are running the projects outside constitutional oversight of the president, the Congress, and their appointees, and of we, the people, most importantly. I want to be really clear that when this I'm sharing is, I would not do it if I didn't think it could be avoided. I would just keep my mouth shut and retire. I think we can avert this. I think that we can avoid the heart attack, as it were, using the analogy I used earlier. And that's why I'm standing here before you. Otherwise, I would have given up on this in 1994 when I first learned of all of these issues. I have a gentleman who was the third highest ranking man at the Naval Research Labs, who prior to in the Vice President's office saw all the plans prior to it occurring. He's deceased, since I'm talking about it now. I did not talk about it for years. And he was told, I used to stay at my home. He said, look, I was told my wife and my children, my grandchildren would be killed along with me if I ever mentioned this. Now, the mother lode, the sort of the crown jewel of that kind of event is what has been planned assiduously since the 1950s. And that is a threat that would unite the world around a military junta, militarism, that would put all of humanity together, but against one or more extraterrestrial races. Everyone thought, well, we're going to learn that lesson in Vietnam. We forgot it. And we had Iraq. We forgot it. So they let a certain amount of time goes by, the population becomes complacent, we have a very short-term memory on such things, and then they move another one forward. Now that plan, which they came up with in the 1950s, has been very carefully rolled out. And I was asked today by a gentleman I was meeting with, he says, when do you think they might do this? I say they began in 1950 something. It's already happened. It's already happened. The false flag has already happened. Now, not the crescendo moment, not the final act, all right? But acts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, have already transpired. What do I mean by that? What I mean is, these operations figured out that the psychological warfare value of this subject was such that they could set up events that are completely hoaxed, beginning in the 50s and 60s, that would convince people that those events were of extraterrestrial origin, alien, when they were not. And so blur the lines between the actual ET activity and the human stagecraft, as it's called, that most people, including people at the White House, wouldn't know the difference. The problem is certainly not UFO subculture, and certainly not the media. No one in government I know, for the most part, has a clue. Even mid-level people, functionaries within the majority intelligence committee, MAJIC, M-A-J-I-C, that runs these operations, do not know about this. This is why Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, the first CIA director when it was formed in 1947, took the place of the OSS, said in a letter that
I've never felt so close to the possibility of disclosure. The Nephilim, the giants, you can't.
In a letter that the secrecy surrounding UFOs was a threat to the national security. This is why Eisenhower said the secrecy, unwarranted secrecy is what he said. It could be a threat to our democracy and our way of life. And they were referring to this dynamic. But the problem is, in that vacuum of secrecy, extreme, illegal, unacknowledged special access projects, which is what they're called, at a compartmented level, and I was talking to a gentleman today about this, at least 21 levels, compartments, past the level of the president. 21 levels. That you have a permanent infrastructure that has evolved or spun off from the legitimate government, but that is embedded within the corporate sector, the intelligence community, and the military sector, that is run amok viciously of our liberties and our freedoms. And we'll get into this also. This gets into some issues that are going to make me very unpopular with some folks. I don't care. I mean, we don't have time for that. I don't care if you like me, love me, hate me. People got to know the truth on this. I've been told that me, my wife, my children, and my grandchildren would all be killed. He says, I'm not going to talk about it. And back when we were doing these briefings for Congress, and in fact even before then, the Asilomar gathering in 1995, we reached out to Neil Armstrong, because I knew from contacts and family that when we landed on the moon, we weren't alone. There were two people who've been on my team for many years who were good friends of his family. And so we reached out to him and invited him to come to those events, and he politely declined and told us that it was made very clear to him and the other Apollo astronauts who witnessed this first event, where when we landed at the crater on the moon, the rim at the top of the crater was, quote, crowded with UFOs, the craft that were up there, multiple of them, and that these were filmed. I know people personally who've seen that film, and that's why the film footage that came back to the Earth, we did go to the moon, But some of the footage, it doesn't make sense because the flag is moving. Now the reason for that, and this is where people say we didn't go to the moon, it was all hoax and filmed in a basement up in New York. The truth is we went, but during the lunar orbiter, going back before the Apollo mission, we actually were circling the Earth taking the first early digital photographs. And as you know from the testimony of Disclosure Project witness Carl Wolf, there were structures on the moon that were artificial. Some were newer and some were very ancient. And so they knew the covert programs, and these images were being downloaded to out here at Langley, not the CIA headquarters, Langley Air Force Base, to a compartmented operation run by the National Security Agency that was then sequestered away from the other NASA scientists. But the people running that project, the deep black people in those projects, knew that it was likely we were going to encounter something not of this world or a UFO when we landed. Therefore, they had filmed some footage that they could splice in if something started happening. So during the live transmission, if something started happening, there's a delay that went through this National Security Agency filter, and they could immediately, instantly put in. And that's why there's a couple frames where the American flag is moving. Well, there's no atmosphere on the moon, okay? Which was the one mistake they made in that whole plan. That's the telltale giveaway. Now, some people have taken that, the conspiracy theorists have said we didn't even go to the moon. We did go to the moon. But they knew that it was likely there were going to be ETVs, extraterrestrial vehicles up there. And so when they stepped out, of course, you know, and we're approaching actually, before they even landed, they saw them. So they were already with this sort of pre-prepared film that looked very, very good, except for this one error. And so Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin know for a fact. Now, Neil Armstrong said, look, you know, if I were to go forward and talk about what actually happened, I've been told, Neil Armstrong said this to us, that my wife, my children, and my grandchildren would all be killed, that they would take us out somehow, some terrible accident. And he says, I'm not going to talk about it. Now, Buzz Aldrin has just basically, he sort of had a nervous breakdown after this and was actually at an Air Force facility. I know a man that was there with him, and he confided that this is also what happened. I also know Buzz Aldrin's sister, who pulled me aside and says, yes, you're absolutely right, that is what happened, but it's not my job to out Buzz Aldrin on this. If he's ready and he's able and allowed, he will speak about it. But you have to understand, enormous pressure was put on these men never to speak about what actually happened. Now, one of the things that Neil Armstrong was overheard saying, and this was reported in Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret, is that Neil Armstrong stated that we were essentially warned off the moon. That in other words, these civilizations did not want us going to other moons or planets to colonize them with the consciousness of nationalism and the Cold War. Because remember, the Apollo project was really a proxy for the Cold War. The United States was in a complete panic when Sputnik overtook our space program, the Soviets. And so the race to the moon was part of, and always was part of, the military competition between two huge superpowers, the old Soviet Union and the United States of America. And so when we went there, but we went there not as a peaceful world civilization, but as a competing Cold War effort that were armed with thousands of thermonuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs, pointed at each other. That was not the consciousness that the ETs want to see us going into space with. They want us going into space with the consciousness of peace and cooperation, not militarism and war. So that's sort of your, let's say if there's an entry ticket to space exploration, that's the main one. And we haven't quite reached that.